We'll kick this off. I'm Grant Wilson, Executive Chairman of Tivan Limited, here this afternoon, Friday in Sydney. Welcome you all to another edition of Tivan's investor briefings. This will be 4, maybe 5. Wasn't necessarily expecting to do this one. It's only been 6 weeks between drinks. But we've had some really important news this week, being the Molyhil acquisition and a placement with ETFS as an important cornerstone investor. So I want to take the opportunity to introduce them in terms of where they fit in. And it's again in the spirit of the open and transparent communications. When there are big changes at Tivan, as there have been this week, I think it is important to explain them, to afford our shareholders the opportunity to answer questions, or to ask questions and for me to answer them, which we've done again this afternoon. I think we'll be able to pull through with 45 minutes today, so a shorter session. I do want to stay focused on what's changed at Tivan rather than a broader corporate overview today. So again, that'll be the Molyhil acquisition and ETFS. The Tuckwells arriving as a very important shareholder and project financier for Tivan. So without further ado, I'll turn to the slides. These are up on the ASX 15 minutes ago. For most of you on the call, existing shareholders, you'll know the mission, and you'll see obviously the change on our project map. Molyhil, directly adjacent to Sandover, 200 k's northeast of Alice. No change to the mission though, nor to the strategy, which we'll come to. Just a very, very important acquisition announced on Monday this week. Next. Tuesday this week it was. Now, let me explain. The rationale is very much intertwined with the corporate strategy. For several years now, I've been highlighting to anyone that cared to listen the importance of the critical mineral sector, the shifts that were likely to play out around the world, Tivan's strategy in terms of aligning very specifically with Japan and in terms of creating a footprint across Northern Australia where we would have unique comparative advantages which were durable. Now, that strategy was difficult to execute in the first year. We were laboured with TNG's legacy, which was pretty horrific. We had a very big vanadium resource. We had a time where vanadium was not flavour of the month, and the critical mineral sector was in a huge downturn. Frankly, for 2 years there, off the top of the lithium bubble, the whole sector was under pressure. Now, things have shifted this year pretty much as I expected. With Trump arriving back on the scene, that has provoked much more focus back on the critical mineral sector, especially rare earths, of course, but it's opened up that schism between the East and the West, and you're seeing really significant policy changes around the world as a consequence of that. And you're seeing interest in the critical mineral sector not just pick back up, but probably to new highs in some areas, like really, really specific policy focus on different critical minerals. And it's global. It's a global thematic. I think it's durable. I think we went through 2 years of winter at the start of Tivan, and I think critical minerals are very much back now. And so into that, we have positioned the firm really proactively. I think all the foresight that we had for these developments will be paying dividends, not just now, but in the many years to come. We've operated around this Lassonde curve. We've led with Speewah Fluorite for the past 18 months. We doubled down on fluorite with Sandover Fluorite acquisition about a year ago for a song. And we've been looking since for other opportunities, again, fitting into that category of low-cost options, things that we felt strongly about in terms of playing into our comparative advantages, whilst advancing the overall thematic and narrative of the firm. We looked and have looked for early stage opportunities. We're still working with Earth AI on Sandover. We'll make an announcement on that shortly. We are in the process of recrafting our engagement there. We've just been really busy, as you can imagine, on a bunch of other things in the short term. And obviously we're up in Timor. Again, early stage exploration projects, breaking new ground up there in terms of the way that we're operating, looking for copper and gold. We'll have more to say on Timor as soon as we can. I'd certainly say in the next month or so when we finally get some results back. And we expect to be engaged up there, for several years ahead, again with exploration strategy. Now, that led us to looking to fill some gaps on our Lassonde curve. We're very focused on trying to get the company to the earliest revenue possible and focused on other opportunities to do that and to put the company in a position where we can leverage revenues and cash flows as quickly as possible. Not that interested in critical minerals projects that will take decades, and many of them do. The average project now looks like 15 to 20 years from discovery to development. Oftentimes, that's because the project will involve advanced processing very specific to a deposit, perhaps very complex chemical processing that's very typical for rare earths, for example. And the development cycles are incredibly challenging, incredibly capex intensive. There are another sort of rung of critical minerals projects which are right in that hotspot between China and the US, which involves more physical processing. And those projects are the ones that we are really interested in because you can develop them much more quickly. They can be incredibly lucrative. And it's into that sort of category that Molyhil fell. And so we have been interested in the project, for some time. Obviously, we did an acquisition with the vendors last year on Sandover Fluorite, so I was aware of it at that point. Fair to say that Tivan wasn't in a strong enough position this time last year to acquire a project of this scale. It's an NC major project. It's JORC defined. It's on the vendor's balance sheet for $20 million. This time last year, Tivan still had debts, and we had less than $1 million in the bank when we acquired Sandover Fluorite. That was a very creative transaction. But the company has strengthened a lot over the past 12 months, and we are in a position now to make these sorts of moves, and we wanted to make it as soon as possible because I think as the company gets stronger, it'll be harder for us to get set at a discount like we have on this particular transaction. And in terms of the specific timing, I think I can share that there was a change in leadership at both companies in the intervening period. The managing director of Thor, long-standing, stepped down late last year, and at Investigator, there was a big change in leadership about 2 months ago. And so with those two changes, that opened up room for a new dialogue, which I jumped upon, and we structured a deal, which I'm very happy with. I think the vendors are happy with as well. And we're very pleased to announce the outcome earlier this week. And so what does it do for Tivan? It gives us that second project in terms of a very credible project, which is in a hot space right next door to Sandover Fluorite, which is advanced on the Lassonde curve, meaning that there is an opportunity for us to pull this one through quite quickly. That's our view, and I'll explain a bit more on the next slides. Okay, so for the mineral resource, this is, and perhaps just to back up a little bit, one of the big distinctions between those two phases on the Lassonde curve, the discovery phase and moving to the production phase, is simply this. You've gone through years of drilling. Drilling's very expensive, and that's ahead at Sandover Fluorite. So when we come to comparing these two opportunities in Central Australia, the most obvious difference is that with Molyhil, it has been drilled extensively. You can see some metrics here, 20,000 meters. That's millions of dollars worth of drilling. Like, it would cost us $5 to $6 to $7 million potentially to drill that amount at Molyhil. It's been done. The data room's in quite good shape in terms of the drilling. We did spend the past 6 weeks doing deep dive due diligence, not just internal to Tivan, but with SRK, like doing an independent geological review of the work. It can be very challenging to do that sort of due diligence. This project's been passed around for 20 plus years. It was mined back in the 70s, different owners with different levels of capability and different levels of funding at different times. But we're quite confident on the geological side of it, which I'll come to towards the back end, less so on the project studies. And, we've made that quite clear in our ASX announcement. We'll have to redo, and we always want to redo the studies to the levels that our team would be comfortable putting their names beside. But we're buying a resource that we understand that's been drilled out and that's in demand and obviously right next door to Sandover. So it is an advanced project. It's an NT major project. That designation's changing, but you'll see this project in the Federal Critical Minerals Prospectus and so on and so forth. So it's quite different than picking up an early stage project. That's reflected, of course, in the price. It does mean that our ability to pull it through into production is also much faster. And whilst there's risk, it's much more certain because we're not facing the geological risk that we would be facing at other earlier stage projects. So that's the basis of the JORC. Now, obviously, with tungsten and moly, they got caught up in China's big dramatic moves back in February to put on export restrictions. So there's a whole range of minerals that are now in play, in my view, between the East and the West. I do think fluorite will be caught up in it at some point. That's my public view. Fluorite did have different forms of export restrictions on it between 2000 to 2011, and there was a big trade dispute that went all the way to the WTO. There were some rulings. China did actually respond to those rulings, and since then it's been less involved in restricting the import and export of fluorite. I think that will come back, and when it does, I think you'll see the sorts of price reactions that we've seen, particularly in tungsten earlier this year. You can see on that chart to the top right, a really aggressive re-rating of tungsten prices once China signaled that they were going to mandate export licenses. That has a really significant impact because China controls most of the downstream and midstream processing of tungsten. It is a supercritical mineral. When you look through the US's critical minerals list, which they published just a month ago, like they do this every 3 years in the US, you'll see tungsten, I think, was number 8 out of the 50 or so they named because of its high impact in the defense sector and in terms of its knock-on effect to GDP. If there is an interruption, this is an interruption. The West is responding by trying to create effectively its own supply chain. That will take time, especially because the midstream is so concentrated in China. Meantime, you're seeing effectively a price squeeze, and I think it's durable. Like, I really do. I think these big developments that are occurring this year are historic, and I think 2025 will be viewed as that break point between the East and the West across many, many critical minerals, tungsten and moly being 2 of them. So, of course, when this started to play out, it upped the ante for us, I think, to try to get another acquisition done. This one was perfect for us. There are other things we're looking at in the NT. In Queensland, even at one point, not really wanting to go to Queensland, frankly, but in the Kimberley too. Probably looked at 5 different projects this year to give you a sense of the intent that we had. But this one, obviously being next door to Sandover, has these unique properties. And once it became available, which is realistically 2 months ago, we got through the work that we needed to. We negotiated hard. If I can, a quick word on the consideration, like it is the case that we've bought this at 50% of book value, notwithstanding that it's a red hot market. That's an incredible deal, particularly bearing in mind we've used some deferment on the cash payments and even have the option to use shares. So all of those things point to a really great transaction for Tivan. And I think most notably for those that are looking through in terms of the overall value creation, the opportunity for Tivan, the simple way to think about it is to look at the revenue line. Like, I think that's the easiest thing to do. It's quite simple for anyone to have a look at Thor's DFS, to look at the amount of tungsten and moly that was expected to be produced in 2018, to look at the prices they assumed that they might be able to realize, and to recalculate the revenue line, and you'll get to a pretty significant number. The ASX will not let me ASX will not make me print that number in a slide deck, but effectively the calculation is quite simple. They were using a tungsten price of $390 US in MTU. That's like 550 now. They were using a moly price of $11 a pound. That's like 25 now. They were using an Aussie dollar exchange rate of 74. The Aussie's at 66, so that's favorable as well. So you've got 3 big drivers all in your favor. And then you have an interaction effect as well, because the Australian dollar value of those commodities is so much higher like doubled effectively. That's when you do resource estimates, it means that there's more mineable tonnage as well. So you have a volume effect. So if you put all those things together, you're going to get really significant uplift in revenue. It's sort of similar to how we were thinking about Speewah Fluorite at the time. Like we knew the CapEx was frankly, if I can say bullshit. And similarly, with this 2018 DFS, we placed no credibility whatsoever on the CapEx. But you've got so much of a buffer from the revenue line, and we trust it. We trust the geological modeling, especially the first 2 years. The first 2 years are a super high grade at Molyhil, and we believe that will underwrite a really, really quick payback period and give us some really, really strong economics to work with in Central Australia. So that was sort of the rationale from a due diligence point of view and from a profitability point of view. In terms of actually being able to deliver, I've said this several times on other calls, but for those that are new to Tivan, let me just restate. We are working in some of the most remote and challenging parts of Australia on a routine basis. So, remote in the Kimberley and super remote here. Alice is remote, but like where we are here in Central Australia is about as far as you can be from civilization in Australia in all directions. And so, out there, there are various challenges, and the obvious ones are transit. Now, one of the great things about moly and tungsten is that we don't have to produce very much because these minerals are so valuable. And so we don't have to be as concerned in terms of location, or concerned at all in terms of moly and tungsten about being so remote. But you do have other challenges, like particularly water in the desert. And one of the real reasons we wanted to get our hands on Molyhil is that it's got a big water production bore. We know it's in good shape. We've tested it as part of the due diligence. We did a big site visit with permission of the vendors to test the water infrastructure, especially. And that's really pertinent as well for Sandover Fluorite. So we feel very good about that. We still have to get permissions, of course. And that's really what's ahead. The reason I've included this slide is that there are two big sets of permissions ahead for us in Central Australia. And this is Sandover Fluorite as well as Molyhil. And we have started at Sandover Fluorite, and indeed Sandover, the longest and probably the most challenging form of approval that you are required to have in Central Australia, and that is from the traditional owners and the native title holders and the Central Land Council. They play an outsized role in Central Australia, and without their support, you are going nowhere. The nature of land title in the Northern Territory is quite different than anywhere else in the country because of the Aboriginal Land Rights Act, 1976. And you can take it from me, having grown up in Alice and having now worked in this role for nearly 3 years, that if you do not have the Central Land Council on board in Central Australia, you will find it extraordinarily challenging to build anything, and the times involved, the time lags involved would be so extreme that it would not be commercial. And so where we are with the CLC and the traditional owners, having worked on Sandover Fluorite for the past year or so, is in a very good spot. We've healed the company from TNG. We have existing documents referred to as mineral exploration deeds in place with the CLC. Those documents can be ported directly across to Molyhil, and I believe they will be, with the advantage of Molyhil having been mined before and it being a circular pit design. This means that the project has very, very low impact as a disturbance footprint because it has been disturbed before. So if you're viewing this through the prism of the Central Land Council, for example, it's already a mine site. In a sense, the damage has been done. And so it's much easier for us to work through the relevant permissioning processes with the TOs and the native title holders, as we've already done with Sandover Fluorite and Aileron and Dnepa, and now with Molyhil. So that side of things looks really good. You're buying an established disturbance footprint. Excellent. On environmental approvals, disregard what's said publicly by the vendors, specifically Thor, on there being environmental approvals in place. That is not true. We will have to effectively start again. We will have a lot of the data, and we have a shift in regulatory regime in the Northern Territory, which works for us. But take comfort from the fact that Tivan is in Darwin. We work very closely with Northern Territory government. We know the regulatory process extremely well. We have dedicated environmental advisors in Darwin. And again, this is a relatively straightforward, low-impact project because it's been mined before. So we'll have to pull through those approvals quite quickly, but it's absolutely doable with our team in Darwin. So it's those sorts of subtleties, I think, which do actually work very significantly in our favour in terms of being able to build something like this on a quick time frame. I think for Alice, I know for sure the town would rally behind Tivan in building critical projects. You could probably see it in the reaction of the NT government. We didn't provoke that. We didn't even ask for the NT government to put a big press release out about our vision of a critical minerals precinct with these two projects side by side. But of course, they jumped at it because firstly, they can see that it is a compelling vision with everything that's going on in the world right now. And secondarily, I think they know that it's Tivan, and they know that we have a reputation of saying things and then doing things, and that we can get things done, especially in Central Australia. So I think they're quite excited about it, and there's different ways the NT government can help, ranging potentially from the NT Jobs Fund providing a project facilitation loan early on. That's, I think, certainly on the table, to different forms of infrastructure, and most importantly, to these forms of regulatory engagement, which will give us the guardrails to pull through, particularly on the environmental and mining license side in good time. So I think that side of things is important. Obviously, we've put Japan here as well, and I'll mention that in a minute. But all of this was with the full awareness of Sumitomo Corporation, JOGMEC as well. We were with Sumitomo Corporation's management all last week in Kununurra and Speewah. They knew what I've been working on for a while. They're excited about it. And of course, Sumitomo itself has a deal already at Sandover Fluorite Project with us. It's an MOU, but it is a binding deal in the sense that it has rights of first refusal. And they're looking forward to exploring, I think, the additional opportunity. I'm going up to Tokyo on the weekend, and this will be a big topic for next week and beyond. And I think a real opportunity for everyone to mutually benefit from the opportunities that are there. So the final slide on Molyhil addresses some of the questions we've got, which is, what's the sequencing and what's the time frame? As opposed to like Sandover Fluorite and Speewah, where we've put out those quite meticulous grid charts, sort of month by month, what we're looking to achieve, very predictable schedule. I know the market values that. I know shareholders value that. We're not yet ready on Molyhil. We've spent 6 weeks pulling this apart. We've been very focused on getting an outcome for shareholders. And again, that was me organising a placement as well as structuring a deal that I was happy with, excited by, in fact, as well as keeping Japan in the loop and comfortable whilst organising this, very, very significant delegation last week. So we had quite a lot on our plate, not to mention our 30,000 metre drill program at Speewah. So we're extremely busy. It's not the right time for us to put out like a meticulous grid chart on Molyhil. And it's partly because we want to do more work ourselves, and we want to probably park a decision in terms of what's the real priority, like what's the tip of the spear at Central Australia. Is it Sandover Fluorite? Is it Molyhil Project? I know this question's all over online. It's a very fair question. Sitting here tonight, I would shade it in favour of Molyhil, but I'm not sure. And the most important thing that we wanted to achieve was to own it and to give ourselves this optionality and to have this incredible option on Tivan's balance sheet for many years to come. The reason I think it is Molyhil is because of what I said before, which is we've already got the benefit of an existing JORC-defined resource. There are many things in the data room which are of value. There are obviously diversification benefits for Tivan in pursuing a different critical mineral. It means we're not totally beholden to the fluorite price, for example. Plus there's the transit costs, which are relevant on fluorite and less relevant for moly and tungsten. But we're not sure, and it's largely going to be demand driven as well. And so the next couple of weeks in Tokyo will be quite revealing. I've got, incredible run of meetings up there, including the big roundtable between Japan and Australia with Minister King on Monday. Tivan is at the top table now in Japan. It's an exciting place to be. It's a privileged place to be. We've earned it through hard work and really dedicated risk-taking and relationship building, I would say. And yeah, we're looking forward to exploring these opportunities in good faith in the next couple of weeks. So let's see what our partners have to say, how they want to sequence things as well. I think that's really important. And then back at Sandover, we're about to drill. And we don't know exactly how the drilling will play out at Sandover Fluorite. We're very, very optimistic. What we need to see, or what we want to see in order to support a really rapid development of Sandover Fluorite is material which enables us to recover a high percentage of the ore into met spar. And that's the biggest unknown. Like, we're very confident on the lengths of the strikes. We need to learn more about the depth and the width. Granted, like, that will go to the strip ratio of Sandover Fluorite. But the key unknown, and which will be addressed in the next couple of months from the drilling campaign, is what are the recovery rates of what we drill into met spar. Now, we don't know. It could be 20%, it could be 30%, it could be 50%, it could be 70%. We've got no clue, and there's no way to know until we run some test work. And without that information, we can't really form an assessment on how amenable Sandover Fluorite is to a fast-track DSO-type met spar project. And without that bit of knowledge, it is hard to know what would go first. Even if our Japanese partners want the met spar and are excited about it, and even prepared to run the risk of 2 fluorite projects in Australia at the same time, because that's a real risk. If we can't get those recovery grades out of the gates, I think it's unlikely. Similarly, we might get them and we might be in great shape with Sandover Fluorite, but we choose still to go with Molyhil for these different reasons. It's in demand. There is a genuine break between the East and the West on tungsten and moly. And let me say moly as well. Like, there's not just tungsten. Moly's very, very important, and it looks like it's going to move into big structural deficit as the moly supply dries up from the big copper mines in South America over the next 10 years. So it's in demand. I think it's in durable demand. It can be a very complex critical mineral to mine. I think, without casting too much shade on the other tungsten projects in Australia, I think that's where they've struggled. They've undercapitalized. They're struggling with non-process infrastructure. They're underground. And I don't think they've got the metallurgists and the process engineers that Tivan has. Our team's, I think, absolutely top-notch. And they're excited to get into tungsten and to solve what are these hard problems which seem to bedevil the production at other mines in Australia, but around the world as well. It's a tough one, but I think we've got those capabilities. So we're going to put all this into the mix over the next couple of months, stay on focus in terms of wrapping up this big year that we've had, and we'll make some good decisions, I think early next year in terms of what to prioritize. And those decisions will be made right across the range of considerations that I've mentioned, obviously in the best interests of Tivan, but taking into account the views of our project partners in Japan, and always still prioritizing that path to revenue. Like, I still am completely driven by making sure that Tivan has the fastest and strongest path to revenue and profits, and indeed potentially 2. I think the simplified vision would be that I now want Tivan to have built 2 projects by the turn of the decade. I think Speewah Fluorite and one of these 2. I don't think we can do both in Central Australia before 2028, 29. I think we can do both. And there are so few critical minerals projects in Australia that have actually been built successfully. If you think about this whole decade, you're going to end up with Mount Holland and Kathleen Valley. I think there'll be other things that have popped and dropped, like like Core Lithium, the Dolphin Tungsten project. I think it's been comprehensively mismanaged. There are other critical minerals that are trying now to catch some of the tailwinds. Obviously, there's a big push with rare earths, but these projects will take a very, very, very long time. So if Tivan can have emerged from the ashes of TNG and built 2 projects on that time frame, I think it would be an incredible achievement, not just for our company, but a major contribution to the Australian critical minerals sector. And of course, we're looking to do that in lockstep with our partners in Japan, really strengthening that bilateral relationship. And that's why I'm in Tokyo next week and the week after, frankly. A big push in Japan for the next 10 days for me. So that's a simplified vision of where I think we are now. I think we can build 2 projects and deliver them into first production before 2030. The exact sequence, I'm not sure. Speewah remains the tip of the spear for sure. One of these 2, my guest tonight, Molyhil, I'd say that was 70-30 confidence though, and we'll make a decision in Q1. So let me now turn to what I think is the other major development, or is the other major development at Tivan this week. And I think in a sense, this one, if I'm looking online at a lot of the commentary, which was, I think, really positive this week, and we're quite grateful for that. It's hard when you come back and you do placements in general. Retail shareholders are so conditioned to criticize placements, and perhaps rightly so in most cases in the junior resources sector. Our placement this week was really well received. It's rallied all week on high volumes. That's practically a unicorn, like you hardly ever see that. So we're really pleased, I think, by the reception to the acquisition and to the placement this week. I think what got lost in the mix is the arrival of ETFS Capital, and specifically the Tuckwells, and specifically Graham Tuckwell. This is a massive thing for our company, if I can say. Completely differentiates Tivan from anything else I can see in the junior resources sector. We effectively have now our own investment banker in Graham Tuckwell, and effectively our own private equity firm in ETFS Capital. It will be over to Graham, I think, to explain, the rationale for their investment and why it is that they want to back Tivan. They'll do that at the AGM. Really looking forward to introducing both Graham and Louise to our shareholders at the AGM in Melbourne. But I can say hand on heart that I think this is one of the most important things we've achieved at Tivan over the past couple of years. And I would say probably the most bullish thing that's happened to Tivan this year, like without question, in my view, because you're solving for 2 or 3 things here at the same time, and 2 or 3 of the hardest things to solve for in the junior resources sector. The first is the principal agent problems in the placement market. So I've just mentioned this, but I think we've done like 7 or 8 placements now. They've all been battles because I wanted to work around the brokers. I don't think the brokers are there for the company. I think most of the time the brokers are there for the investors because they're repeat players. And of course, they're there for themselves, and they won't mind me saying that. So all of the placements we've done have been, really challenging, I would say. And I've, brought my own network into play. You'll see again this week, most of the money raised was direct through Chairman's List, avoiding massive brokerage for the past couple of years as well. But the Tuckwells effectively have provided 2 of the placements, and 2 of the most important being May, which was a direct placement, and again this week contributing a bit over half of the placement and enabling me to price it as well, and price it flat effectively. And that made sense to me because of what we were doing with the funds, and because I think the company is fundamentally cheap. Now, if you're a broker, if you're a flipper, you wouldn't agree with that. But again, look at how it's traded, we're up 15%. So I think it was a very fair outcome, but it was enabled by Graham also understanding the principal agent problems that do bedevil the junior resources sector, working with me to secure the outcome for the whole company, enabling matching placees to participate, which was great, and also sending this incredibly strong signal. And I do want to emphasize this point. The Tuckwells and ETFS Capital have put all of their shares, and I think they're now 6% major shareholder of the company, into escrow, for basically 18 months, all the way through the due diligence phase at Speewah. They can't trade their shares at all. They've given up all that liquidity, which everyone else cleaves to and demands and wants. And they're doing that to send a signal of support to the company, and also to enable particularly Graham, as a former investment banker, to work with me on the project financing. And to do that, we need to be able to share information, deeply confidential information about the JV and how we're working towards finalizing offtake contracts with Japan, for example, funding rounds with EFA and NAIF, and all this confidential information. So the shares that ETFS has are in escrow. That's a huge show of commitment to Tivan and to the Sandover Fluorite Project, but it also enables us to stay in regular contact and effectively negotiate together to bring to a conclusion the project finance rounds that are ahead. I say rounds because it could well be plural. Now, I can't take anything for granted here, of course, but I trust Graham deeply. I think his achievements are quite singular in terms of he's pioneer of the ETFS sector. It's an incredible entrepreneurial success story. And what Graham and Louise have done at the ANU, my university, is going to stand the test of time. It's truly remarkable. It's quite ingenious how they set up the Tuckwell Scholarship as well. But they did it for impact. And in the discussions that I had back in Q2, when Graham and Louise were signaling that they did want to be really involved at Tivan, even I questioned why. What is the motivation? Why single us out? And I think it's because they can see that what I've done so far at Tivan has been with that broader aim of having really positive impact across regional Australia, remote Australia, and also in building out our team, our young team. If you think about the Tuckwell Scholarship, it is designed in a way to support excellence, academic excellence, and particularly excellence which may not shine through in traditional academic filtering processes. So many of the recipients of the Tuckwell Scholarship are people that have done really well, but have come from a position of disadvantage and yet have shone through. And so perhaps the underdog sort of ethos at Tivan, and the fact that I ran that brutal activist campaign at the start, the fact that I am so committed to Central Australia and to Northern Australia, and the fact that I also believe in supporting talent and building teams. And if you look at the way that we've created the team at Tivan, it's all about that. It's all about providing opportunity to young, super talented, dedicated Australians. I think that appealed. So I think there's really strong alignment. There's great skill sets. Graham's formidable in terms of the way that he structures deals. And I wanted to explain a bit more about this tonight so that shareholders can understand and take confidence. And then I want to clam up because I don't want to put words into Graham's mouth or into Louise's mouth. What I want to do is introduce them at the AGM, which I will do in Melbourne. I really look forward to that. And I'll give the mic to Graham and or Louise, and I'm pretty confident they'll take the mic up because Graham gave a big speech in Kununurra last week, impromptu in front of Sumitomo, and it went down a treat. And so, of course, for our Japanese partners, this is as good as it gets. They never really wanted a big glaring project equity gap at Speewah, that's their worst case, or B, for me to fill it with aggressive, sharp-elbowed offshore capital, or C, have the uncertainty of Tivan potentially having to raise $50 million at the head company level, which I never wanted either for reasons that I've previously explained, completely averse to dilution. And so Graham's arrival on the scene, solving these problems with ETFS capital, as well as being able to approach placement markets with great confidence. I mean, it's an absolute godsend, and long may it last. So we're very, very privileged to have this relationship. I'd encourage shareholders to think a bit more about it. I personally think that this is, as I said before, the most bullish thing that's happened at the company this year, potentially ever. It's been hard won. It's earned. I think it's tremendously important. And as I said, I'm looking forward to introducing Graham and Louise to our shareholders in Melbourne later this year. So to wrap up tonight, because it is a shorter briefing session, I'll just pull through some questions. I haven't I know there were other questions on other topics, but tonight's really just about Molyhil and ETFS. So yeah, let me address these and wrap up early for once. So in terms of Molyhil, the rights to explore, yes, we now own what the joint venture owned, in a sense, which was they owned Molyhil and they owned the rights to explore on our side of Sandover Fluorite. So Tivan now owns that. And that means if we find something out there, it's ours. That's very important because it's a hugely prospective area. And I think because of the way Molyhil went down, like it was sort of mined a bit in the 70s and then it was marooned, orphaned for these 2 decades. There has been exploration around a lot of these other tenements. Bonya's mentioned here, for example. I don't think there's been a lot of exploration around these 2 tenements. And again, Sandover Fluorite was just sitting there waiting for us to stumble across it and understand its value. So anything we find out there now is Tivan's, which is really important. And one of the many reasons we wanted to do this transaction. The water bores was another very important reason, which perhaps people may not appreciate, but water in the desert is critical, and having a big production bore right in the middle of the 2 projects is massively important for us. We didn't go after Bonya Hutcho because we didn't want to slow down. That would have necessitated a long conversation with Arafura, would have tipped Arafura that we're working on this. Arafura is practically a competitor, and we'll see where that goes in the future. I don't think we need it for this. It's also relatively low grade. We think there's other stuff floating around on the tenements. So yeah, we didn't think it was worthwhile to have that part of the conversation opened up. It would have meant a deal. If a deal was to happen, it would have potentially forestalled it into next year. And like all things at Tivan, I want to keep moving as fast as we can. In terms of timeframes, Rich, listen, it is premature. Gun to my head, and this is what this is. So please take this with grains of salt. I think it's 2 years. That's my sense. Working back through my scoping, PFS, environmental approvals, TOs, the relevant test work. That's super fast for any project. I think it's 1 year to build it. So that puts it on a 3-year track. 3 years. Again, bearing in mind that anything is 15 on average is super fast. Anything that's in that 3 to 5 year wheelhouse, I'm interested in. But effectively, that means that you're dealing with things that have physical processing. So in the case of tungsten and moly, you do have that. You're going to go from, crushing to grinding to ore sorting. Again, technology that our guys are now very, very familiar with, and which could potentially be redeployed at fluorite if fluorite goes second. And then you're into like dense media separation and things like that. And so again, our guys have great expertise in this. I think they can solve it. We need to prove things up, particularly the test work, that we can reach the specs that we're comfortable with, that we can achieve separation between, the tungsten and the moly effectively. We're not interested in the copper. For those that are deep into this already, doubt it'll be worth trying to separate such a small amount of copper. But yeah, I think if we do all that work, my sense is that it takes a couple of years. So Speewah Fluorite, in this instance, still in the lead, but potentially a short development and construction period, and not constrained by the weather. Up in Speewah, we're losing 4 or 5 months every year, and we're having to put a huge amount of pressure on the team. This drill campaign at the moment is the case in point. We're already having to race against the weather this year because we know it's going to hit in November. In Central Australia, we're clear. We can work all year round. It's a bit hot, of course, but it changes things in terms of deliverability. So what I'm looking to achieve really is to have the 2 bubble up pretty much in parallel. We are strong enough, particularly with ETFS in the mix, to do 2 joint ventures at the same time. We are strong enough to build 2 different project teams. We've just now hired the project manager that I've wanted for a couple of months. I'll announce that next couple of weeks. So really excited about that. We're getting so many CVs, each week, each month through our achievements. People want to work, with Tivan. They want to work at places where stuff happens. So yeah, we're not really sure exactly yet. As I said, between Molyhil, Sandover Fluorite, probably over over-explaining now, but we'll make a call in Q1 and then we'll be full steam ahead. My guess is it's 2 years, 1 year to build it, potentially 2 cash flow positive projects at Tivan, well before the end of the decade. That's the aim. The Cal's question, I think you listened to my ABC interview, Cal. That was a throwaway line. I'm on radio 20 years. I don't know, I'm 51 years old. Maybe I was thinking about mortality when I said that. I'm not sure. We don't know how big Sandover Fluorite is. And so it wasn't a reference to that. It was me just saying, listen, we're going to be out there for a long time. And I do sincerely believe that if we're building infrastructure, common use infrastructure, it would be a huge mistake for us to invest large sums of money out there for the benefit of someone else, which is what would have happened. And so, yeah, we really had an axe to buy Molyhil. We've done it now. Any money that we put in there that goes to common use infrastructure, particularly stuff that could be worked with the anti-government on, will be for the benefit of both projects and therefore to our benefit and to our project partners' benefits as well. If Japan really comes for this precinct, I think they'll come for everything. That's what I think. Yeah. Offtake. Rudy, these are broader questions, so you'll forgive me. But in a very sort of truncated fashion, I would simply say that for us with fluorite, it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. I am meeting actual customers of Spiwa fluorite next week in Japan. We're at that point now where we've got specs, we've got products. We'll see how this plays out. If I were in their shoes, I would still probably want to source a lot from China, to pay respects to China, because they've got so much influence and control over different forms of the supply chain. I think distancing from China would be a mistake if you're in their shoes, but absolutely, I'd want to build a relationship with Tivan and fluorite, and I'd want to be diversifying. I'd want to have hands on our samples, and I'd want to be thinking about price. And I think if I was them, I'd be prepared to pay a bit more. I would. Because you've got that security of supply, and because it looks like our fluorite from Spiwa is tracking at such high quality levels. And so all of this plays out. It starts really next week. It's going to be interesting to see how we go. Our job in that conversation really is to support Sumitomo Corporation. Like we're a good partner. I think they really took tremendous confidence from the trip last week. That was some of the most senior people in the whole company. That was the CEO and the CFO of the whole chemical solutions team that came to Spiwa. I think as well signaling how important our projects are to their customers. Like their customers knew that senior management was in Australia with us visiting these projects. So signaling in Japanese business culture is really important. We are going to try to get the best price we can. I don't think it's as simple as, okay, this is a premium or this is a discount. I think every situation is negotiated. Everything will play out in its fullness of time. In terms of government policies, I think the Australian government's broadly on track. I think the critical minerals production tax incentive is something that we support, in the sense that we believe the government can and should support companies that are achieving real things in the sector. Lower government royalties, I think, is required from here. And that plays out at the state level. So we are in this conversation with WA government on fluorite. We are averse to a 5% state royalty. They know that, and we'll be in this negotiation, I think, for a while. Our view is that you should not be taxing enterprise and risk-taking behavior, and all of the risk that we have to take to build a new sector in the country is so different than gold or what have you. We're having to define all of these things by ourselves. We have to take all the price risk, the JV risk, the on-country risk, the test work risk, and so on and so forth. And so almost independently of how complex or otherwise the flow sheet is for Spiwa fluorite, our view is that WA government should not be pulling against what the federal government is looking to do in supporting us through international partnership, critical minerals grant, through NAIF EFA lending, through the production tax incentive. So this conversation is live. Next week with this World Expo, just to give you a sense, I think I've been invited by 5 different parties. Like I'm going to events for 5 different groups: WA government, Northern Territory government, the federal government, the Critical Minerals Association, and Sumitomo Corporation. So we've got a finger in all these pies, and what we're I'd say where we're most strongly aligned is federal government. Like Tivan's very strongly aligned with how federal government's rolling out its policies, has been for several years. I think we're looking for WA government to give us that confidence and Sumitomo and JOGMEC that confidence that they understand that this is a unique opportunity we've created for the state in the East Kimberley, and that a 2.5% royalty is appropriate. So let's see how that plays out in the next couple of months and probably into Q1 next year. Otherwise, I think, yeah, it's case by case, really. But we're playing a really strong hand. And again, with our partners in Japan, I think we've created a lot of recognition. And once again, here it helps having ETFS at the table. You know, the fact that I can now approach Tokyo, with a funding partner on the equity side, as well as the federal government on the debt side. It's a really compelling pitch up there and strengthens my hand in the finalization of offtake negotiations as well. So a final question, and I'll wrap up, which is just on the broad critical minerals thematic. It's true, like we've felt, and I think I've said this on Twitter, I think the first 18 months, it was just a real wipeout, and we were surviving in terms of what we walked into at TNG. And, you know, we were sort of stuck on vanadium. So it was like worst of both worlds. You know, you had an absolute write-off of a company to deal with, really nothing. And we were on a critical mineral, which is not yet ready for commercialization. And then you had the critical mineral sector meltdown around us, particularly lithium, but everything got sunk. I felt, and I did tweet at the time, that it was turning about a year ago, just from generic aspects like the Fed cycle and so forth. But my view was always that Trump's going to get back in and really shake things up, and it's played out. People who were at the AGM or watched the AGM will remember that I was talking about tariffs long before people understood what was going to play out this year. Everything that's happened this year has been precisely in line with my expectations, which is why I wanted to position the company so early. And I think presciently, in terms of Japan especially, we are years ahead of anyone else in Japan. And that's a great place to be. That is a great place to be, because we can do other things with them, for them. And I think, in a sense, Molyhil is an example of that. And so I'm pleased, I think, that all of the renewed focus is here now. I think it's our job to stay ahead of it. And I'd say the biggest thing that's missing now is an understanding that it's not all about money or the rocks in the ground. It's about capabilities. And so you're seeing all these headlines, US like throwing around money. I think that's going to continue. People probably get even more desperate. And but they'll come to appreciate what we know to be true at Tivan, which is it's not just a sort of a battle or even a war, to use like these more inflammatory descriptions for the critical minerals. It's a war for talent, for capability. The US does not have the sorts of capabilities that are required to build complex critical minerals project. This is where China is decades ahead. It's down to IP and people and scientists and metallurgists and engineers. Now, Japan has a lot of that. We've got to know and respect JOGMEC and their technical team tremendously. They're so talented. Sumitomo as well, of course. Sumitomo Electric Industries. You know, we've worked with them on vanadium batteries, some of the most incredible engineers on the whole planet. So that's where I think that's where our minds have been at, which was like, okay, if we're correct on this big thematic, and I believe we are, and I think that's really shining through now, it's not enough just to own like these select resources. We've got to build a great team. And that's what we've been doing for 2 years now, but particularly this last year, like we're up to 30 people now. And I've been really, really focused on curating this team that we've got. And it's a great place to work with structured incentives to keep the team and really drive not just recruitment but retention. But away from that, I think we've created an environment like through a very open and collegiate atmosphere where these super talented young people want to work with each other. And it's a really inspiring place to be right now. And I would just contrast it to any other junior resources company in Australia that I know of, where I think it's a real slog. I think it's really, really hard work because oftentimes you're getting stuck behind management that's very self-serving, that's blown out, that doesn't really care, that doesn't really get it. Or you're in these behemoths, these huge firms, and you're just a cog in the machine at a Rio or a Fortescue or where have you. So we're in this unique spot. We're designated critical minerals. We've hired, I think, really brilliantly. All of the team is interfacing with Japan, like directly. That was a team effort last week, hosting all of Sumitomo. And so in a sense, like we're winning the battle for capabilities. And I think that's really going to shine through. If you gave the same resources to two different companies, us and someone else, we could develop something that other company could not. That's my view. And I think that will play out. That's a generic observation. So we've really focused on having that culture of excellence and merit underpinned, by the same principles that I said at the top: hard work, resilience. Like we're still going to be tested, and we know that. But I'd say when I think about the simplification of the critical minerals team this year, it's back, it's hot, it's easy. It's not. It's none of those things. It's certainly gaining more prominence, more attention. There's more politicization of it. I think all of these things will continue. But as much as it's about identifying and owning the right resources, it's about building capabilities and a culture which can deliver projects. And I think that's what we're doing at Tivan. So I'd certainly leave you with that thought. And yeah, I think shareholders should feel very encouraged, not just by the team we've got, but by all of the partners and support we've got around the team now that we can deliver. So that's a wrap, I think, for tonight. Well, it's nearly an hour, so did come inside of it. Want to say thanks again for everyone's support. It was probably a bit of a surprise this week to some. I did provide some hints, but I wasn't frankly sure we're going to be able to pull this off. I'm really pleased with the acquisition, of course. I'm really, really pleased with the relationship that we've built with the Tuckwells, ETFS Captial. I think this is really transformative for our company. And I'm looking forward to just one big push, really. We've got 2 months to go to the AGM. There'll be lots more news coming through before then. Not tipping, not signaling, not hinting, but we're going to give this a big, big push into the end of the year. And I would encourage everyone to come to the AGM. I think it's going to be a really special event in Melbourne. So with that, thank you and have a good weekend. Bye.